for joining me. I'm honoured that my book, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Secular World, received a special mention of excellence in the senior category of the Alberigo Awards. I warmly congratulate my fellow award winners, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to give this address, despite the cancellation of the European Academy of Religion conference scheduled for June 2020. This book arose from my long-standing interest in religious tolerance and intolerance in the modern world. My first monograph was on the Russian Orthodox Church and religious pluralism in late Soviet and early post-Soviet Russia. I was struck by the continuity in the Church and the state's hostile attitude towards one faith above all others, Jehovah's Witnesses. Both church and state found witnesses objectionable on multiple fronts, not least their American origins, expansive underground networks which produced illegal literature and held clandestine Bible study meetings, and of course, their persistent proselytism. I knew very little about witnesses and wondered which aspects of their theology generated those tensions, and how the Watchtower organization, the corporate body of witnesses, headquartered at the time in Brooklyn, responded to them. Once I started researching the organization, I discovered that all over the world, in very different ideological, geographical, and socio-political contexts, witnesses had been a thorn in the side of secular governments, from shortly after their emergence in the late 19th century right up to the present day. I concluded that their treatment provided a kind of global litmus test for religious tolerance. The Watchtower organization counts almost 9 million active witnesses worldwide. Most reside outside the United States, where the group formed in the 1870s centered around Charles Taze Russell, a fascinating and controversial figure from Pennsylvania. He became the founder leader of this highly visible and widely known organization. Witnesses are recognizable from Chiapas in Mexico to Port Vila in Vanuatu for their door-knocking campaigns as they fan out over neighborhoods in pairs with their distinctive literature focused on the signs of the end. This would seem a relatively harmless activity, but they've been widely regarded with suspicion and even hostility by householders and by governments, who have, at various historical moments, sought to stop them from spreading their message of salvation through legal and sometimes extra-legal means. It was evidently their unique interpretation of the Bible and the lifestyle and practices which stemmed from it that led to this animosity. But which elements of witness theology had proved particularly confronting or challenging? This was the question central to my book. Why did the treatment of witnesses so readily reveal the limits on religious tolerance in societies worldwide, historical and contemporary? This was difficult to research, not least because the Watchtower organization, now headquartered in upstate New York, does not make its archival material readily available to outsiders. I had to be innovative about primary sources. I worked in numerous archives in Moscow, where I accessed Soviet reports on the anti-sectarian campaign, as it was known, which took sharp aim at witnesses. And in Geneva, where I consulted documents in the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee Archive on the tens of thousands of witnesses displaced from Malawi to neighbouring countries following brutal assaults sanctioned by the Banda regime. I worked in Canberra too. Witnesses were banned in Australia during World War II for allegedly transmitting military secrets to the Japanese. And in Washington, DC, on the US Supreme Court cases in the mid-20th century, among them the famous flag salute cases. These archives and others provided fragmentary stories which, Taken together, let me compose a picture of the ways witnesses had confronted state authority and why they were seen as so objectionable by modern governments of all ideological stripes. What emerged from examining these contexts and case studies were 4 areas in which Watchtower theology had consistently led to conflict with governments. First was their public ministry. The imperative in Matthew's Gospel to spread the word to the end of the earth before the end comes leads to their efforts to reach non-witnesses, most famously through door knocking. The refusal to refrain from public ministry has led to landmark legal rulings on issues as diverse as trespassing and child labour in the US, and Council of Europe legislation on proselytism, most notably arising from a Greek case, which led to a seminal ruling before the European Court of Human Rights in 1993. Second, the Watchtower organisation's claim to be politically neutral has also brought them into conflict with modern governments, especially in one-party states and during times of war. The requirement that witnesses stand aloof from secular concerns like political ideology and party politics has led them to refuse to serve in the military or fulfill non-combatant service. This has been widely perceived as unpatriotic, even seditious, a perception which led to their ban in Australia in 1941. The refusal to carry the card of Banda's Malawi Congress Party led to 3 waves of massacres, each more brutal than the last, between 1967 and 1976. The Watchtower's unique policy on blood is a 3rd issue state authorities have had to navigate, which has been a particular challenge for countries with national health services. Witnesses are entirely unique in that they welcome medical intervention in general, but refuse blood transfusion in particular. The blood doctrine has forced health agencies to respond to their insistence on non-blood surgery and has been the primary driver behind the development of blood substitutes. There have been high-profile and emotive cases relating to forcible transfusion, particularly in cases relating to children and fetuses. The blood issue has also prompted the only example of coordinated opposition from within the witness community, at least that I'm aware of, facilitated by the rise of the internet and the anonymity this affords dissidents. A final point of tension is the attitude of the Watchtower organisation towards other religions and denominations. It has been unequivocally hostile to the mainstream Christian churches. This has caused issues in countries where there is a state church, when attacking the majority faith is interpreted as attacking the state. Interestingly, the organisation's extensive educational materials produced for witnesses treat world religions with far more balance than they do other Christian churches. There has, of course, been considerable opposition to the Watchtower organisation from non-state actors. I examined closely the rhetoric of the anti-cult movement and the Christian counter-cult movement. These unite anti-witness activists who rail against what they see as an authoritarian, even totalitarian leadership in the governing body, the group of men who determine Watchtower policy. The connections between these anti-cult networks are international. Walter Martin's influential Kingdom of the Cults, which dedicates more than 100 pages to witnesses, was published in Russian in the early 1990s, for example, and heavily influenced the Russian anti-cult movement, which gained strength over the following decades and culminated in the banning of witnesses in Russia in April 2017. There is a dearth of serious literature on witnesses. There is no critical scholarship from within the community, as we have for the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, for example. For the past decade, I have called on humanities scholars especially to take witnesses seriously as a historical subject. and as a research subject. Most of the literature comprises official material produced by the Watchtower organisation, bitter ex-member testimony, and anti-cult and counter-cult material. There have been examinations of the witnesses' impact on legislation and of their experiences in wartime, particularly in the context of North America and Nazi Germany. By far the largest category of literature, of scholarly literature, is in the field of medicine. But these authors, with their concern for treatment and patient ethics, rarely know anything about witnesses beyond their refusal of blood. This is highly problematic, given the role of the Watchtower organisation's hospital liaison committees, congregational elders who facilitate communication and decision-making between witness patients and medical professionals. Without understanding the dynamics within congregations and the imperative to conform to the governing body's doctrine in order to remain a witness, and thus a part of this insular community, the individual patient's position on blood can't be adequately contextualized, let alone understood. I hope the book will encourage other scholars of religion and religious history to take witnesses more seriously as a scholarly subject. By starting a serious intellectual discussion, I hope this book will drive forward our comprehension of this widely known but little understood community and generate rigorous discussion about what witnesses can tell us about conceptions of religious tolerance and changing attitudes towards minority religious groups. More broadly, I hope this close study of witnesses and the secular world will throw light on important global developments relating to religion, state and society since the 1870s. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more, in November 2018, I was interviewed for the New Books Network podcast series, and that interview discusses in much more detail my research for this book. Thank you.